Hey guys, what's up? My name is Elizabeth and welcome back to my YouTube channel. So, Good Friday is coming up. And I think it's very interesting that we call it Good Friday despite the people at the time would have not seen it as good. They would actually have seen it probably as one of the darkest times of their lives. And so I think when looking at Good Friday and Resurrection Sunday, we see such a great story element and a reminder for all personal lives. So there's this pattern called to save the cat, and in the pattern, it's literally this format of how good stories are written. So we have this introduction of the person's character and just who they are in their world. And then we have this incident that changes their world forever, and so then they must enact on this adventure, enact on this change. And then in the middle of this the story, we see that they're starting to maybe be fine, starting to accomplish it. And then almost at the end, we have this almost all hopes is lost scene where you don't think it could possibly get worse, but it gets worse, right? And then at the very end is the victory. And what this shows us is that in good storytelling, we need to have the all hopes is lost, all despair. You don't think the underdog, the rebellion, you don't think they're going to win. You think the bad guy has won, or that whatever it is, whatever conflict that they are trying to overcome has already overcome them. And so you think everything is lost, but then out of nowhere, victory seems to come around the corner. Either the cavalry has arrived, the idea of how to defeat the enemy has come, and the plan is being enacted, and victory is ensured that day or in that story or that time period. And why is that important to know that? Is because the aspect of total despair really helps us almost see the glory of the victory even more. It's like until we see the greatest darkness, do we not see the greater light? It's until we get to the point where all hope is despair, there's something else happening. This victory seems more like a miracle. And so the aspect that Jesus dying on the cross on Good Friday, where they all felt like it was utter despair, all hopes is lost, the Messiah is dead, the Messiah of whom they thought was going to bring a whole new kingdom, overthrow the Romans, has died on the cross. It's over. And out of nowhere on the third day, though it was prophesied, on the third day Jesus rose again. And it's in that do we see such a glorious victory, this conquering of sin and death. But we had to have the Good Friday. We had to have the moment of despair. So oftentimes, even in our own lives, we have these moments of despair, right? But it's amazing what happens when we just hold on, when we just wait a little bit longer. Maybe that, the cavalry, maybe the miracle, whatever it is on its way. And we would have never been able to be partakers of that victory if we have never walked into despair, if we've never gotten ourselves in that situation. I want to connect what I'm saying here to another story, which is the story of Elijah. Now, Elijah was a prophet of God, and many of you may recognize him from the story of the prophets of Baal. See, Elijah went against these prophets of Baal, built an altar, drenched the altar, and the altar ended up being consumed by fire, showing that God was the real God, and their prophets of Baal did nothing, didn't burn on fire, showing that their God wasn't real. And Queen Jezebel was completely upset about this situation. So Queen Jezebel wanted to take Elijah's life. And so Elijah goes fleeing. So let me just be clear. Elijah had just seen the power of God, that God Almighty was the one true God, and now he's fleeing for his life from the Queen Jezebel. Elijah at this moment was in utter despair. Many people have assumed that Elijah was depressed based upon these elements within the story and the way it described him. Some might even say he was somewhat suicidal, even asking God, please just take my life at this moment. And so a lot of us, when we look at that, we might be, dude, have you just not seen the power of God? But we all like that too. We will see miracles of the power of God, and then we find ourselves in a situation where it's utter despair, and we think it's the end. It's over. And so Elijah thought it was over. Elijah thought the worst case scenario possible at this case was that he was going to fall into the hands of Queen Jezebel, and she was going to kill him, because she had made a promise, I am going to kill this man. And I think she gave a certain time frame as well. So Elijah told God, just take my life, just end me now. Like, I'd rather have you take me than be in the hands of Queen Jezebel and have her decide how I'm going to die. So God instead sent an angel and told Elijah, eat, refresh yourself. There's a journey up ahead. So Elijah then later goes on this journey, and we see these miraculous earth, phenomenons, earthquakes, fire. But God was not in that. God was in the quiet whisper, asking Elijah, what are you doing? Where are you? So Elijah then says, I'm hiding because only I am alive. Only I serve you. There's no one else. So number one, he thought he was utterly alone, in despair, and he's the only one that's serving God, and he thinks it's the other end. And actually, we notice that God asked him this 2 times. I believe one time in this scenario, and one time maybe right before he went on this journey. But either way, God asks him. So then God shows him 3 other people who still have not bowed their knees to Baal and still serve him. So one thing we can take away from this is that God shows us that we aren't alone. Even in our despair, we are not alone. So Elijah goes and meets these men. But Queen Jezebel is still alive. Actually, Queen Jezebel does not die until after Elijah has passed from this earth. So that's number 2. God doesn't always take away whatever the despair, whatever the situation it is. God shows us how to sometimes walk through this. But at the very end, Elijah has his victory. At the very end of his life, God takes him up in a chariot of fire. So the worst possible death that he thought in the most despair moment of his life, being in the hands of Queen Jezebel, he ends up getting one of the most glorious death by not dying and ended up going into the chariot of fire. Not because God took away the despair or the situation, but God showed him that he was not alone and showed him how he can walk through this situation. Sometimes in our own lives, the despair doesn't go away, but God shows us that we are alone, that we can walk through it, and at the very end we will find our victory, which ultimately our victory is recommuning with Jesus in heaven. That's our victory. And it's waiting for us. So, why do I say that and Good Friday? It's because both are stories of utter despair, but both show stories of victory. That despite the people having to walk through it, they were not alone. And victory was around the corner. And sometimes, the greater the despair, the more glorious the victory that awaits us. And so I hope this message encourages you to hold on tight whenever you feel despair, because victory is just around the corner. Thank you so much. God bless you, and I hope you have a good Friday. Bye!